Wesley Vaughn's eyes flew open and he shot upright in bed, heart pounding. "What time is it?" he barked into the silence of his penthouse. The massive windows behind him glared with morning sun. He grabbed his phone. 9:42, damn it, he muttered, throwing off the sheets. He was 2 hours late to a meeting he himself had called. The board would be livid. He didn't care. Not really. Not today. He tore through his closet, yanking on designer slacks, skipping socks, and buttoning his shirt halfway as he shoved his feet into dress shoes. His tie hung loose around his neck, jacket forgotten on the floor. He didn't even check the mirror as he flew into the elevator, jamming the G button like it owed him money. The doorman opened his mouth to say something, but Wesley was already bolting out the glass doors of the building. And that's when it happened. He ran straight into her. A coffee exploded between them. Scalding liquid splattered his shirt and papers went flying across the sidewalk like confetti. "Oh my God," the woman gasped, stumbling back. Wesley blinked, stunned. He was dripping, shirt ruined, but all he could see was her. Brown hair piled in a loose bun, a faint freckle on her cheek, and those wide, startled green eyes staring up at him. "I'm so sorry," she said, crouching to scoop up the mess of papers. Her hands were shaking. "It's totally my fault. I wasn't looking." "No," he cut in, crouching too, grabbing a few sheets. "It's mine. I wasn't watching where I was going." She glanced up at him, and for a second, everything else, his meeting, his schedule, the coffee soaking through his shirt, just disappeared. "I'm fine, really." She stood, brushing off her thrifted coat. "But your shirt." He looked down, then back at her. "It's just a shirt." She hesitated, then offered a crooked smile. "Well, at least it wasn't hot enough to burn. You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just embarrassed." "Don't be," he said quickly, noticing the strap of a messenger bag hanging off her shoulder, her fingernails chipped and ink-stained. She looked like someone who lived in a different world than his, but something about her was magnetic. "I'm Wesley," he added before he could think. She paused. Jessa Sinclair." "Nice to meet you, Jessa." She gave a small nod, hugged the papers to her chest. "I have to go. I'm late for an interview." "Wait." The word came out before he could stop it. "Let me buy you another coffee." She laughed under her breath, eyes flicking to his ruined shirt. "You're kind of in the middle of a disaster," he grinned. "I cause them often. One more won't kill me." She looked at him for a few seconds, like she was trying to figure him out. Then she shook her head. "Maybe next time." Before he could reply, she turned and hurried down the street, disappearing into the crowd. Wesley stood there, damp shirt clinging to his chest, watching her go. He didn't know why, but something about her stuck with him. He made it to the meeting an hour later, still wearing the stained shirt and still thinking about the girl with the green eyes. Jessa collapsed onto the cracked bench outside the magazine office, shoulders slumping. The interview had been a disaster. She was late, flustered, and had someone else's coffee on her sleeve. They'd thanked her politely and moved on to the next candidate before she'd even finished her portfolio pitch. She sighed, leaning back, eyes closed. She couldn't afford another rejection. Rent was due. She was 2 weeks behind on groceries. And her backup plan waitressing at the diner barely covered her bus pass, but all she could think about was that man. Wesley, deep voice, messy hair, calm even when drenched in coffee, attractive in a way that made her heart beat faster. And clearly not someone from her world. She shook her head. What was she doing? Dreaming about some stranger she'd never see again. Wesley couldn't stop thinking about her. Not during the board meeting, not during his private lunch at the rooftop of the Waldorf, not even when his assistant rattled off a list of urgent investor calls. He finally stood up, cutting her off. "Clear my afternoon." "But I said clear it." He grabbed his coat and left. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed air. He walked 4 blocks, turned a corner, and stopped in front of a small bookstore with a help wanted sign in the window, and there she was, behind the counter. Hair down this time, glasses on, reading a battered poetry book. He stepped inside without thinking. She looked up, her eyes widened. "You again," she breathed. "Hey," he said, hands in his pockets. "Told you I caused disasters, figured I'd come apologize properly." Jessa blinked. "You really tracked me down to apologize." "That, and I still owe you a coffee." She glanced around. "You're not gonna spill it all over yourself again, are you?" "No promises." She laughed, then really laughed, and something about the sound made his chest feel lighter. "Fine," she said. "One coffee, but only because I need the caffeine." They sat in the corner of a tiny cafe a few blocks away, sipping lattes and talking about everything. Her dreams of being a writer, his vague consulting job that he didn't elaborate on. She didn't know he was worth over $70 million. He didn't tell her. He didn't want her to look at him differently. He just liked the way she looked at him now, like he was a man, not a bank account. "How come I've never seen you around here?" she asked. "I don't usually walk." "I overslept this morning," she laughed. "Lucky me," he smiled. "Yeah, lucky me." When they left the cafe, the sky was turning orange with sunset. She stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed against the chill. He pulled off his wool coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. "Wesley, keep it," he said. She looked up at him. "You're kind of impossible." He leaned in slightly, voice low. "You have no idea." Then he touched her hand just briefly and turned to leave. As he walked away, Jessa stood frozen, his coat warm around her shoulders, heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know who he really was, and he didn't know it yet, but she was about to steal his heart. Wesley stood on the balcony of his penthouse later that night, a half-finished glass of whiskey in his hand and the city lights blinking far below. The wind tugged at his shirt sleeves, but he didn't feel the cold. His coat was gone, with her. And somehow the absence of it felt more significant than it should have. He'd had dinner reservations at a place that booked out 6 weeks in advance. He'd canceled. His assistant had tried calling twice. He hadn't answered. He just kept thinking about the way she'd looked at him across that tiny cafe table, curious, not impressed. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him like that. Noticing the untouched steak on the sideboard, he set the glass down and walked back inside. He didn't want food. He wanted to see her again, but she hadn't given him her number. He wasn't used to that. He pulled out his phone and opened a contact app only his most trusted employees used. "Find out who owns Sinclair Books on 12th. And don't mention my name." By the time the sun rose the next morning, he had everything he needed. Jessa tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she adjusted the stacks of used novels on the front table. The store was quiet, just the creak of the old wood floor and the low hum of the heater. She liked it that way, predictable, safe. But her chest still tightened when she thought about yesterday. He had given her his coat. Who even did that anymore? She hadn't slept much. She'd hung the coat over the back of her chair at home, intending to return it, but something about the way it smelled clean, expensive, and slightly like him made her hesitate. The bell above the door jingled. She glanced up. He was standing there again. Not in a coffee-stained shirt this time, but in a dark sweater that made his eyes look sharper under the overhead lights. He didn't belong in a place like this, but here he was, looking straight at her like she was the only thing in the room. "You're persistent," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans. "You still have my coat," he replied, stepping forward. "You gave it to me. And now I need an excuse to see you again." She tilted her head. "You could have just asked. Would you have said yes?" She hesitated. "Probably not." "Then I made the right call." Jessa crossed her arms. "I'm working. I can wait," he said, glancing around. "This place is nice, smells like paper and ambition." She tried not to laugh. "You're clearly not from around here. I grew up in Brooklyn. Not the part with rent-controlled apartments, I'm guessing." He walked over to the shelf closest to her. "You'd be surprised. My mother worked 2 jobs and my father disappeared before I knew how to spell his name." Jessa's expression shifted. "I didn't expect that. I'm full of surprises." She stepped around the counter and picked up a copy of a hardcover collection of short stories. "You read?" "I buy books I don't have time to finish." "Sounds like a waste. Sounds like hope." She looked up at that. "That's the first thing you've said that I actually like," he smiled. "Then maybe I've got a chance." Jessa motioned for him to follow her to the back. They stepped into the small break room, barely enough space for a table and 2 chairs. She gestured for him to sit. "You're not exactly blending in," she said. "I'm not trying to." "What are you doing then?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the sidewalk." She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That's not how real life works." It does when you stop pretending it's supposed to be boring. She studied him quietly. What do you do, Wesley? He paused. I manage investments. Startups, portfolio planning. That's vague. It's accurate. Are you rich? He looked her in the eye. Does it matter? It would if you expected me to care. I don't. Then I guess it doesn't. They sat in silence for a beat. Do you always chase after women who spill coffee on you, only the interesting ones? She bit the inside of her cheek, then reached into her bag and pulled out his coat. Here, I dry cleaned it. He took it slowly, brushing her fingers as he did. You didn't have to do that, I know. I was hoping you wouldn't. Why? Because then I'd have a reason to come back, Jessa exhaled, lips twitching. You're not what I expected, neither are you. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, checked the screen, and frowned. What is it? He asked. My landlord, she said. Again, he stood. Come with me, she blinked. What? You need to get out of this place for a while. I have a shift. I'll buy the bookstore for an hour. She stared at him. He didn't flinch. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? Her eyes narrowed. You're insane. Possibly, he said, brushing past her toward the door, but I have a car outside and a reservation at a place that doesn't take walk-ins. She hesitated. He turned. Say yes. She grabbed her coat. Fine. But I'm not changing clothes. Wouldn't ask you to. When they stepped outside, a sleek black Maserati idled at the curb, a driver waiting by the open door. Jessa stopped in her tracks. You drive that, not personally. She turned to him slowly. You're not just some guy who works in finance, are you? He met her gaze. Not exactly. She folded her arms. You lied. I didn't volunteer everything. There's a difference. She didn't move. He stepped closer. Let me make it up to you. She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she slid into the car. As the door shut behind them, Wesley gave the driver a simple nod. Where are we going? She asked. To a place where no one will care what either of us spilled yesterday. And the car pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the pulse of the city. The restaurant was perched atop a historic hotel, hidden behind a velvet-lined corridor that led to a private rooftop terrace. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a vintage brownstone, but once the elevator doors opened, Jessa felt like she'd stepped into a dream. Candles flickered along marble-topped tables. A fountain murmured softly in the center, and a jazz trio played beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. She took one look around and turned to Wesley. This is a date. He raised an eyebrow. Would it be a bad thing if it was? You didn't tell me we were going somewhere like this. I didn't think you'd come if I did. She folded her arms. You were right, but you're here now. A hostess in black silk approached with a knowing glance and led them to a table in the corner, secluded behind a wall of ivy. The second they sat, a waiter appeared and poured 2 glasses of chilled white wine without a word. No menus, no questions. Jessa leaned closer. They just assume you'll want the wine. They assume I want the best, and they're usually right. She studied him across the table. You're used to this. He didn't flinch. Since I was 21. She tilted her head. What happened at 21? I sold my first company. What kind of company? Software, predictive analytics for logistics networks. She blinked. That sounds made up. It's not. It's just boring unless you're trying to move freight across the globe, which I'm not. Then let's talk about something that doesn't put you to sleep. I'm serious, Wesley. Why me? He leaned back, glass in hand. You didn't flinch when I showed up again. You didn't ask me for anything. And you look at me like I'm a problem you haven't decided if you want to solve. I haven't. I know. Jessa held his gaze for a moment, then picked up her glass. You're different when you're not trying so hard. I'm not trying at all. That's the part that's dangerous. Dinner arrived without them ordering. A series of small plates, artichoke agnolotti, scallops in saffron cream, something with truffle foam she couldn't pronounce. Jessa tasted everything, but more than once she caught herself watching Wesley instead of eating. The way he listened without interrupting. The way he noticed when her glass was almost empty. The way he didn't fill silence just to fill it. When dessert came a single dish of blackberry tart with burnt honey glaze, he pushed it toward her. I don't eat sugar this late. She raised a brow. That's tragic. Convince me otherwise. She took a bite, slow and deliberate. You're missing out. He watched her, not touching his wine. You're not what I expected either. I get that a lot. Do you? Mostly from people who assume I'm either naive or bitter. I'm neither. So what are you? Tired of pretending like I have to prove I belong in rooms like this. He didn't say anything for a beat. Then you do belong. You don't even know me. I know enough. That's not how real life works. Maybe not your version, but mine's always been about instinct. She set her fork down. I need air. He stood immediately. Come on. They stepped out onto a smaller terrace that overlooked the city. The night had cooled, breeze sharp against her skin. Wesley shrugged off his sweater and handed it to her. No coat this time, he said. But I'm not letting you freeze. She slipped it on, sleeves too long, cuff brushing her fingers. Is this going to be your thing now, dressing me? I don't mind. She turned to him, arms crossed. You're used to getting what you want, usually. But not with me, he smiled faintly. Not yet. So why keep trying? Because I'm not interested in women who want what I have. I'm interested in the one woman who doesn't seem to care. She looked out at the skyline, lights rippling like stars fallen to earth. You're not afraid I'll change my mind once I know the whole story. Are you planning to? Depends on what I find out. Then ask. She turned toward him again. How many people do you trust? He didn't answer right away. Then 3. Maybe 4. And how many know who you really are when the doors are closed? He looked down at the city. 2. Why me? I don't know. I just know the second I left you on that sidewalk, I wanted to turn around. She exhaled, eyes narrowing slightly. You talk like a man who's used to taking risks. I don't take risks, I calculate them. And what am I? The one variable I can't predict. She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. That doesn't scare you, it terrifies me. He looked at her, then really looked. Not like someone trying to impress, but like a man seeing something he didn't understand and couldn't walk away from. Jessa's throat felt tight. I don't know what this is. I won't ask you to define it, just come with me. Where? Tomorrow. There's an art benefit at the Vanderbilt Gallery. Come as my guest. I don't have a dress for something like that. You will. Her eyes narrowed. Wesley, I'm not trying to buy you. I just want you next to me. She hesitated. Then I'll think about it. That's all I need. They stood there for another minute, neither one speaking. The city moved beneath them, alive and unbothered, but something between them had shifted. The air felt different, and when he finally walked her to the car, opened the door, and watched her slide in, he didn't ask if he could see her again. He already knew he would. The dress arrived 2 hours before he was due to pick her up. Jessa stared at the box sitting on her bed, her fingers hovering over the ribbon. She hadn't told him yes. She hadn't even told him maybe. But there it was, a deep navy gown, sleek and elegant, wrapped in tissue paper like it had been waiting for her all her life. No tag, no receipt, just a handwritten note in bold black ink that said, "You'll outshine the art." She set the note aside and pulled the dress from the box. The fabric was softer than anything she'd ever owned, heavy in a way that whispered luxury with every movement. She tried it on once, then again. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at her own reflection, heart pounding like it had something to prove. At 7:30, the car pulled up. Jessa stepped out of her building to find Wesley waiting next to a vintage Rolls-Royce, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo with a midnight blue lapel. His cufflinks gleamed under the street lamps. His hair was swept back, and when he looked at her, something in his face changed. You look like you belong in a gallery, he said. I'm not sure I know how to walk in this. He offered his arm. Then lean on me. The Vanderbilt Gallery's east wing was closed to the public for the benefit. Inside, the walls were lined with private collections pieces from estates she'd only read about in textbooks. Jessa didn't say anything at first. She just looked at the art, at the people. At Wesley, he introduced her only by her name, not as his date, not as a guest, just Jessa. And he didn't abandon her. He didn't drag her from person to person or leave her to fend off curious looks. He stayed close but not possessive, present without pressing. At one point, he leaned near her ear and whispered, "Half the people here haven't seen the inside of a subway in 20 years. She turned her head slightly. What about you? I still remember which line smells the worst. She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. You're not like the men I've met at events like this. I'd hope not. A woman in a backless gown approached them, then tall, severe, with a voice like polished glass. She greeted Wesley with a familiarity that made Jessa's stomach twist. "I didn't realize you were back in the city," the woman said, brushing a hand over his arm, "just for a while. And who's this?" "This is Jessa Sinclair." Jessa extended her hand, but the woman only nodded, eyes cool. "Sinclair, any relation to the publishing family?" "No," Jessa said plainly. "Just the name." The woman turned back to Wesley. "We should catch up sometime. I still have that sketch you gave me in Paris." Jessa didn't respond. She didn't need to. Wesley's stance shifted, subtle but clear enough. "I'm not the same man I was in Paris," he said. "But I'm glad you kept it." The woman's smile froze, then faded. "Of course." When she floated away, Jessa looked up at him. "You give all your exes artwork, only the ones who mistake possession for admiration. You're full of lines tonight. I'm full of clarity." The benefit ended with a short speech and an auction that raised more money than Jessa would ever see in a decade. She clapped politely, accepted a glass of champagne she didn't drink, and followed Wesley through the crowd until they reached a quieter wing of the gallery, where the lights were dim and the paintings more abstract. She stopped in front of one, a swirl of charcoal and oil, layered and sharp. "This feels like you." "How so?" "It's composed and wild at the same time, like it's pretending not to unravel." Wesley looked at the painting, then at her. "You keep doing that." "What?" "Seeing through things I haven't even named for myself. Maybe that's why you keep chasing me." "No," he said softly. "I chase you because I don't want to go back to the version of myself that existed before you." The gallery emptied slowly, but they didn't leave. Eventually, a staff member passed them discreetly and murmured that the car was waiting. Wesley offered his hand again, and she took it without hesitation. This time, the car didn't go back to her place. It climbed north toward the river until the city fell quiet around them. When they stopped, he helped her out and led her through an unmarked gate behind a row of converted warehouses. Inside was a rooftop garden strung with low golden lights. A table had already been set. A private chef stood beside a grill, nodding once before stepping away. Jessa turned to him. "You planned all of this. I had a feeling you'd say yes. You're not afraid of being wrong." "I used to be," he said, "but I've been wrong about a lot of things. You're not one of them." They ate beneath the stars, just the two of them, no waiters, no distractions. He didn't try to impress her with more stories. She didn't ask for explanations. They talked about spaces, physical and emotional. He told her about the warehouse he was converting into a community art space in Red Hook. She told him about writing stories she never finished because she was too afraid no one would read them. "You should finish one," he said. "I wouldn't know how to end it." "Then start with what you know." She looked at him. "What if it ends badly? Then it's not the end." He reached across the table, his hand resting over hers. "Jessa, I don't want to pretend I know what's next, but I know I want you in it." She didn't answer right away. Then she stood, walked to the edge of the rooftop, and looked out at the water. He followed. "I've spent most of my life making sure I didn't need anyone," she said. "I got good at it, but then you walked into my bookstore and offered me your coat like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing." "I know that now." She turned to him, eyes steady. "I want to try." "Even if I'm scared." He stepped closer. "So am I." She reached up and touched his face, fingers brushing his jaw. "Then let's be scared together." When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was quiet, certain, like every step that brought them here had led to this exact moment. Later, as he drove her home, she rested her head against his shoulder and said, "You still owe me a coffee." "I'll keep owing you," he murmured, "as long as you keep letting me show up." 6 months later, that same bookstore had a new sign in the window, Sinclair and Vaughn Books and Letters. Inside, Jessa sat behind the counter, typing the final words of her first finished manuscript. And when Wesley walked in, carrying 2 cups and a crooked smile, she stood, kissed him, and took the one with her name written in marker. They didn't need to say anything. They had everything they needed. The bookstore buzzed with soft conversation and the occasional chime of the front bell as customers wandered in and out. A young couple stood near the poetry section, whispering over a worn copy of Neruda. Jessa watched them from behind the counter, a subtle grin tugging at her lips. The smell of cinnamon from the nearby cafe drifted through the open door. The place felt alive, like it had finally taken its first real breath. Wesley stepped in from the back room, sleeves casually rolled and a stack of invoices in one hand. He didn't glance at the papers. His eyes were on her. "You forgot the delivery from Langston Press is arriving today," he said, setting the stack down beside her. "I didn't forget. I was hoping you'd get it so I could pretend it was a surprise." He leaned on the counter. "You're getting good at delegation. I've been watching you." He nodded toward the couple. "You ever think we'd end up here?" "I didn't think we'd end up anywhere," she replied. "But I'm glad we did." He reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I have something for you." She gave him a wary look. "Last time you said that, I ended up on a rooftop with foie gras. This one won't need a fork." She followed him up the narrow staircase to the loft office they'd converted a few weeks earlier. The space was still bare, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a large bulletin board pinned with notes about upcoming author events. He walked over to the desk and pulled open a drawer, retrieving a slim envelope. She took it slowly. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a short letter printed neatly on heavy cream paper, her name at the top, a publisher's logo at the bottom, and in between an offer. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Is this real? They loved your manuscript." "I didn't say anything until I was sure." She looked up at him. "You submitted it. You left it on your laptop. I read it, then I sent it to someone I trust." "You had no right to." "I know," he said, his voice quiet but certain, "but I also know you never would have sent it yourself. And the world deserves your words." She stared at the letter again. "They want to publish it. They want to launch it, full run, national campaign." She pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You are," he said. "And I'll be standing next to you at every signing, even if I have to carry your pens." He stepped toward her and cupped her face in his hands. "You changed everything, Jessa, not just for me, for this place, for yourself. You just haven't let yourself see it yet." "I don't know how to do any of this," she whispered. "You don't have to know, you just have to keep going." She leaned into his touch. "You really believe in me?" "I've bet my entire future on it." He kissed her slowly, deeply, the kind of kiss that didn't need permission. It was a promise, not a question. Downstairs, the bell above the door rang again, and the murmur of footsteps filled the space. But neither of them moved. Later that evening, long after the store had closed and the lights had dimmed to a warm glow, they sat on the floor of the loft with a bottle of wine and takeout containers between them. She read sections of her manuscript aloud, laughing at lines she'd forgotten she'd written, while he offered commentary with mock seriousness. "You know," she said, stretching her legs across his lap, "I used to think love was something that arrived with a bang, something loud, obvious, and now I think it's quiet. It sneaks up on you while you're shelving books and spills coffee on your shoes." He handed her a fortune cookie from the bag. "You're getting poetic on me again. I'm a published author now. I have a reputation to uphold." He cracked his fortune open. "Mine says the best things come to those who dare. Seems fitting. Mine says someone close to you is hiding something wonderful." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a velvet box. "Only if you say no." He blinked. "What is that?" She opened it to reveal a slim silver band with a tiny engraving on the inside. "It's not much. But I figured if you can surprise me with a publishing deal, I can propose in a bookstore." "You're proposing to me. I figure we've done everything else backwards. Why stop now?" He stared at her for a long moment, then took the ring and slid it onto his own finger. "You just made me the happiest man in this city. You're already the richest. Not until you said yes. I haven't said it yet. You didn't need to. They didn't have a wedding with 100 guests or a 5-tier cake. They didn't fly to the Amalfi Coast or rent a French shadow. Instead, they stood in the bookstore one quiet morning, surrounded by shelves and stories and the life they'd built together. She wore a dress with ink stains on the hem. He wore a navy suit and no tie. A local judge officiated. The couple from the poetry section served as witnesses. And when they kissed, it felt like the final page of a book she'd never dared to write. Years later, the bookstore grew into a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Children pressed their noses to the glass to see the seasonal displays. Writers came from all over to read in the loft. And every anniversary, Wesley would bring home a single copy of a new release with her name on the cover and tuck a note inside. You wrote your own ending, and it was perfect.